It started like any other morning. The kind of morning you barely notice because you've lived it so many times before. A pale wash of sunlight rested across the backyard. The grass still carried a trace of dew. Somewhere beyond the fence, a sprinkler clicked softly in the distance. You stepped outside holding a cup of coffee, expecting nothing more than a few quiet minutes before the day began. And for a while, nothing seemed unusual. A light breeze moved through the maple leaves. Shadows shifted slowly across the lawn. The world felt ordinary, familiar, almost forgettable. Then you noticed the crow. It was perched on the top rail of the fence about 20 feet away, completely still, not searching the ground, not calling, not hopping from branch to branch the way crows often do, just watching. At first, you barely thought about it. Crows were common here. You had seen this one before, or at least one that looked like it. But something about this moment felt different. The bird didn't look away when you stepped forward. It didn't startle when the screen door clicked shut behind you. It simply remained there, dark feathers catching the early light, its silhouette sharp against the brightening sky. And somehow, the silence around it felt heavier than it should have. You may have experienced something similar yourself. A moment so small you almost dismiss it, yet something deep inside tells you to pay attention. If you're new here, subscribe before you leave, because what you're about to discover may change the way you look at the birds around you forever. Because this wasn't the strange part. The strange part was what happened next. The crow seemed to notice something about you before you had fully noticed it yourself. Maybe you already know that feeling. Not because of a crow, not because of a bird at all, but because there have been moments in your life when something small seemed to notice you in a way that felt strangely personal. A dog that walked across a crowded park and sat beside you on a difficult afternoon. A deer that stopped at the edge of a field and held your gaze for a few quiet seconds longer than expected. Or perhaps it was nothing more than a sudden silence in a familiar place that made you aware of emotions you had been carrying all day without fully acknowledging them. Most of us move through our routines without paying much attention to these moments. We explain them away. We tell ourselves they are coincidences, random details in an ordinary day, and yet some part of us remembers them. Years later, we can still picture the light, the air, the exact place where it happened. Standing there in the backyard, coffee slowly cooling in your hand, you may have felt something similar. Not fear, not excitement, just a quiet awareness that something was different. The crow remained on the fence, calm and patient. The breeze that had been moving through the leaves seemed to fade. Even the distant sounds of the neighborhood felt softer somehow. And what made the moment unusual was not what the bird was doing. It was what you suddenly became aware of inside yourself. The weight you had been carrying since waking up. The thought you kept pushing aside. The feeling you had not spoken aloud to anyone. Somehow, the presence of that silent bird made it impossible to ignore. And this is where things begin to get interesting. Because what felt like a private emotion may not have been as invisible as you believed. Most people assume that the natural world notices only the obvious things. A loud sound, a sudden movement, the arrival of a storm. But standing there that morning, it became easier to wonder if something else was happening all around us every day, hidden beneath the surface of ordinary life. The crow had not moved more than a few inches, yet its attention never seemed to drift. It watched the yard. It watched the house. It watched you. And the strange thing is that crows spend much of their lives doing exactly that. Not in the way people often imagine, but in a quieter way. They observe patterns. They learn routines. They notice what belongs and what does not. If you pay attention to a crow long enough, you begin to realize that it is often watching long before it is seen. Perched on a telephone wire at sunrise. Sitting silently in the branches of a distant oak. Standing on the same fence post at nearly the same time each morning. Details most people never notice because they are busy moving through their day. But the crow notices. It notices when a gate remains closed for weeks and suddenly stands open. It notices when a familiar car does not leave the driveway. It notices when someone who usually walks with steady purpose moves more slowly than before. Tiny changes. Almost invisible changes. The kind that seem too small to matter. And yet the natural world is built on them. A shift in the wind. A shadow crossing a field. A slight change in posture. Everything carries information. Everything leaves a trace. And this is where the hidden layer begins to reveal itself. Because what felt like a private feeling inside your own mind may have already become visible in ways you never intended. The The question was not whether something had changed. The question was how much the crow had already seen. As the morning light climbed higher, the crow finally shifted its position. Not much, just a small turn of its head, a slight adjustment of its feet along the weathered fence rail. Yet somehow it felt deliberate, as though it was continuing a quiet observation that had begun long before you stepped outside. And perhaps that feeling is not as unreasonable as it sounds. Researchers have spent years studying crows, and one of the discoveries that continues to surprise people is how closely these birds pay attention to individual humans. They do not simply react to movement. They recognize faces, they remember patterns. In some studies, crows were able to identify specific people years after a single interaction. But what matters here is not memory alone. Memory is only useful when something is worth remembering. Imagine what that means from the crow's perspective. Every day, the world around it is shifting. Cars come and go. People appear and disappear. Dogs bark. Gates open. Lights switch on before dawn. The bird survives by noticing changes that others overlook. Small changes. The kind that happen quietly. The kind that happen inside people too. Psychology tells us something similar. Long before we speak, our emotions begin showing themselves through tiny signals. A slower walk across the yard. A different posture. Eyes that linger on the ground instead of the horizon. Even a brief hesitation before opening a door. Most people never consciously notice these details. Yet the human brain responds to them constantly. And perhaps that is why the mystery feels so familiar. Because the crow may not have been sensing anything magical at all. It may simply have been paying attention with an intensity that most of us reserve only for the things we love. And that possibility somehow makes the moment feel even stranger. The next morning, you found yourself looking toward the fence before you even stepped outside. It was a small thing. So small you might not have admitted it to yourself. Yet some part of you was already searching for that dark shape against the pale morning sky. The air felt cooler that day. Thin clouds drifted slowly overhead, softening the sunlight into a silver glow that spread across the yard. The feeder swayed gently, leaves whispered somewhere high above the roofline. And there it was, the same fence post, the same quiet silhouette, waiting, or at least it seemed that way. The bird did not fly toward you. It did not perform anything remarkable. In fact, what made the moment memorable was how ordinary it appeared. You took a few steps into the yard. It remained where it was. You paused. It tilted its head slightly. Then everything settled back into stillness. Over the following days, little details began to accumulate. The kind of details that mean nothing by themselves but feel different when placed together. Sometimes it appeared within minutes of you opening the back door. Sometimes you would glance through the kitchen window and find it already there, standing on the fence as though it had arrived before you. Once, during a quiet evening when the last light was fading from the trees, you noticed it perched on a branch overlooking the yard, almost hidden among the leaves. Not watching in an intense way, simply present, familiar. And that may be how connection begins in the natural world. Not through dramatic moments, not through grand signs, but through repetition, through shared space. Through 100 small encounters that slowly transform a stranger into something your eyes instinctively search for. And before long, you realize the pattern has changed. You are no longer merely noticing the bird. You are expecting it. After a while, it stopped feeling like a series of separate moments. The encounters began to blur together into something larger. Not because the bird was doing anything extraordinary, but because the timing became harder to ignore. On mornings, when your thoughts felt clear and uncomplicated, it often remained at a distance. Perched high in a tree, a dark shape among dozens of branches. Easy to notice, easy to forget. But on the days when something weighed on you, the distance seemed to shrink. Those were the mornings when it appeared lower, closer. Sometimes on the fence, sometimes on the edge of the shed roof where the early sunlight touched the shingles. Always calm, always watching. You began noticing other things too. The way the yard itself seemed different when you stepped outside carrying a heavy mind. Colors appeared softer. Sounds traveled farther. Even the call of distant birds seemed to hang longer in the air. Psychologists sometimes describe attention as a spotlight, but that description never feels complete. Attention is not only about what we see. It changes the world we experience. A worried mind notices different details than a peaceful one. A grieving heart hears different sounds than a joyful one. And perhaps that is why the pattern felt so difficult to explain. Was the bird changing? Or were you? The more you thought about it, the more the question expanded beyond the backyard. Across forests, coastlines, deserts, and city parks, countless animals spend their lives reading subtle shifts in the behavior of other living things. Tiny changes, fleeting signals, invisible currents moving beneath everyday life. And if entire ecosystems are built upon noticing what others overlook, then a deeper question begins to emerge. What if emotions are not nearly as hidden as we believe they are? Perhaps this is why stories like these appear in so many places and across so many generations. Long before researchers studied animal behavior, long before psychology gave names to the invisible signals people exchange every day, many people believed that the natural world was paying closer attention than it seemed. Not because animals possessed supernatural powers, but because they lived within rhythms that humans often ignored. Many people believe that certain encounters arrive when they are needed most. A bird appearing during a period of uncertainty, a familiar call heard during a moment of loneliness, a sudden feeling of connection that arrives without explanation. Whether these experiences are spiritual, psychological, or something in between depends largely on who is telling the story. Yet something about them feels difficult to ignore. Standing in the backyard, you began to understand why. The morning sun had climbed above the trees now. The shadows were shorter. The neighborhood was awake. A truck rolled slowly down the street. Somewhere nearby, a screen door opened and closed. Life was moving forward exactly as it always did. And still, the presence of that quiet observer seemed to place a subtle frame around the moment, as if drawing attention to something usually left unseen. Not the bird itself. The feeling beneath the bird, the awareness beneath the feeling. Researchers often speak about perception as a process of gathering information. But many of life's most meaningful experiences begin before information feels complete. They begin as a sensation, a pause, a feeling that something matters. And perhaps that is why these encounters linger in memory long after they happen, because they seem to point toward a possibility that is both simple and profound, that the world around us may notice far more than we realize. And if that is true, then the most remarkable part of this story may not be the bird at all. Eventually, the need for an answer begins to soften, not because the question disappears, but because something more important takes its place. Acceptance. One evening, as the day settled into that brief stretch of golden light before sunset, you stepped outside once more. The air was warm. The sky carried long bands of amber and pale blue above the rooftops. Leaves barely moved. Even the neighborhood seemed quieter than usual. The fence cast a long shadow across the grass. And there, once again, was the familiar shape. Not close. Not far. Simply part of the scene now. For a few moments, nothing happened. No dramatic sign. No revelation waiting around the corner. Just two living creatures occupying the same piece of evening light. And somehow that felt enough. It is strange how often meaning arrives this way. Not through certainty. Through presence. Through the gradual realization that some experiences do not need to be solved in order to matter. The longer you watched, the more the moment seemed to expand beyond itself. The bird, the fading sunlight, the sound of distant wind moving through trees you could not see. All of it felt connected to something larger than the individual pieces. Not mystical, not supernatural. Just deeply alive. You thought about all the mornings you had rushed through without noticing them. All the subtle feelings that had appeared before words. All the moments when intuition quietly arrived long before understanding caught up. Perhaps this was why the encounters stayed with you. Not because they proved anything, but because they reminded you of something easy to forget. That beneath schedules, conversations, and daily noise, there is another layer of experience. Quieter, slower, more observant. And if you sit still long enough, sometimes you begin to notice it noticing you too. The next morning, the fence was empty. Sunlight spilled across the yard exactly as it always had. The maple leaves stirred gently in the breeze. Somewhere in the distance, a lawn mower hummed to life. Everything looked familiar. Everything looked unchanged. And yet, something felt different. You stood quietly for a moment, coffee warming your hands, waiting without fully admitting that you were waiting. The fence remained empty. The branch above the shed remained empty. The rooftop where that dark silhouette sometimes appeared held only morning light. Days passed, then weeks. Life resumed its usual rhythm. Meetings, errands, conversations, ordinary moments stacking one upon another. But every now and then, usually in the quietest part of the morning, your eyes still drifted toward that fence. Not because you expected anything extraordinary to happen, only because some experiences leave a shape behind long after they are gone. And perhaps that was the real gift hidden inside the story. Not proof, not certainty, just attention. A reminder that the world is alive with signals most of us rush past every day. A reminder that feelings often speak before words do. That intuition sometimes arrives before understanding. And that being truly seen can happen in unexpected places. Maybe the bird never sensed anything mysterious at all. Maybe it simply noticed what was already there. But somehow, that possibility never felt smaller. It felt larger. Thank you for staying until the very end and sharing this quiet journey with me. If stories like this speak to something deep inside you, consider subscribing before you leave, because there are still countless mysteries hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to notice them, and perhaps, somewhere outside your window tonight, perched on a branch you have never paid attention to before, something small and watchful is sitting in the darkness. Maybe it is only a bird, but then again, it never quite feels like only a bird.